Well, I'm Dr. Owen Anderson, and I'm a professor of philosophy and religious studies. And I often get questions from my students about pop culture. And because of that, I get involved in answering philosophical questions about pop culture. And Dune is very popular right now. And it's an interesting sci-fi because it includes religion. This is 22,000 years into the future, and there are still Christians, Muslims, and Judaism. So, and more, right? Just to name a few of the current world religions. So the question is, what's the relationship of sci-fi and religion? Are these religions just sort of vestigial organs left around after all these years? Or does the author put them in there in order to say something about the structure of the world? So my students asked me about that and about God in Dune. So I came up with some ideas. Let me switch over to my notes. Now, someone might watch Dune just for fun. They enjoy the drama, they get involved in the characters, and it's a good time. It's well made, it's interesting, and that's great. This is not about that. This is more about the philosophical structure of the Dune world. And I also don't think this has any spoilers in it. So you should be safe if you haven't seen the film yet watching this. So now what pulls us into a story is some level of relatability. We have to be able to relate to the characters somehow. And usually it's the human drama that pulls us into it. So the conflicts going on, the personal development, the background stories, all of that interests us. And then if it's set in a detailed world, that's all the better. That interests us even more. So Dune has all that. And I want to reflect on it and think about what's going on with religion. Here it is. There's no clear evidence of God in the show. And it's been 22,000 years from now into the future, and there's no obvious presence of God. So this really exasperates what is called the hiddenness of God problem. Where's God? What's God doing at all this time? Is redemption occurring? So the religions in that sense could be troubling, a troubling feature, a futuristic world where humans have just gone about their own business with no help from God and there's no religions. Well, that makes sense because they fell away as useless. But that there's still religions when all of their promises have failed raises a question. Like, what are they holding on to still? So that makes you wonder, what's the logical structure of a fantasy world in general? Right? You might have this one, sci-fi in the future with spaceships. You might have Tolkien, which is more like the past, and fantasy with magic. Well, if it's relatable to us, there has to be some coherence to it. If you were to make a story just about a battle between two kinds of square circles, well, it's not relatable. There aren't square circles. They can't be real. It's not just that they aren't real, they're not even imaginable. So it can't be something like that. It has to be coherent. Well, what's the structure of the Dune universe? Is it just materialism, like what's like Star Trek seems to be? Is it just a material world? All things are made of atoms and space bouncing around. Well, there's also these religions. Is God real? Now, matter, I would argue, matter can't have existed from eternity. And that's a truth, just like there are no square circles. So in the Dune world, matter can't have existed from eternity. And it also can't have come from nothing. It can't be an uncaused event. So even in the Dune world, there must have been a creator who made the world. So where's the creator now? It's kind of getting to point 3 in a minute here. A material universe is where only matter exists and matter is eternal is a contradiction. Matter can't have existed from eternity. It's running down. And if it had existed from eternity, it already would have run down. And since it hasn't yet run down, therefore it hasn't existed from eternity. Quick synopsis of how I would argue that. So where's God then, if it's not just matter? Now, sometimes in Tolkien, people will say, you see the providence of God kind of in the background, like at just the right moment, Frodo's foot will slip, or just the right moment, the good guy will notice something, and that's God. It's kind of like a God of the gaps where God's not present at all, except for little pieces of luck along the way. It makes me wonder what people think about God in this world. where do people see God in the real world? Perhaps that's all, say, a fan of Tolkien, that's all they see God in this world as well. They don't see the presence of God anywhere. So someone who comes to a show like Dune and one doesn't know how to show that God exists, and then second doesn't see the providence of God in this world, won't be able to evaluate that in the fantasy either. And mostly what they'll take from it is just kind of an interest in the human drama and then some fun fantasy things. They won't really think about what it says about reality. So that's the third one is you have Christianity, you have Islam, you have Judaism. Where's God after 22,000 years? Are the Christians just wrong about the world being discipled and sin overcome? Or is Islam just wrong in its view of the end times and the return of the Mahdi? Is this a kind of like really dismal millennialism where just nothing happens? Also, the humans seem to be rational. They can come to understand truths, but they don't come to agreement about religious differences. So for all those years, you have the three theistic religions, and also then there's also witchcraft, continuing together and not coming to the truth of the matter after all that time. But aren't these humans interested in knowing the truth of the matter, just like they might figure out technology and solve political or economic problems? Wouldn't they want to know, does God require an atoning sacrifice for sin? That's the difference between, on the one hand, Judaism and Christianity, on the other hand, Islam. And then between Judaism and Christianity, if God does require atoning sacrifice, is the animal sacrifice sufficient, or must it be the Messiah, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world? Now, that's another theme that you don't really see in brought up much in Dune is redemption, the need for redemption. These humans in Dune all have moral failings. How will they be redeemed from that? Is it just a matter of learning? And again, the person who watches Dune might be projecting their own understanding or misunderstanding of redemption on Dune. And they might think, yeah, moral failings are just things you learn, you fail, you learn, you learn and you grow and don't do it again. There's no sense of the justice of God who requires atonement. And so since if a person doesn't see that in their own life or in this world, they're not going to see that in the other world. But it leaves this question of how will any of these characters be redeemed? And so that got to the number 4 here, religion and knowledge. Is God real at all? Can humans in Dune know that God is real? It seems to use religion just as blind belief, but would blind belief persist for 22,000 years? Or is Star Trek right that it would just fall away eventually because it's not of any use? That seems to be the more probable thing. People, if something's not useful, people get rid of it. And knowledge hasn't been attained. There doesn't seem to be God at all. And then the last one here is, what's good for these characters? How can I relate to them? How can I get into their problems? They have political struggles. They have interpersonal and romantic struggles, family struggles. But ultimately, why should we care? What's good for them? I know in this life, what's good for me would be finding meaning. And I find meaning by knowing what I am and what my purpose is. And I know what my purpose is by knowing what created me, by knowing my creator, and by knowing the glory of the creator revealed in all of the works of God. Now, the characters might wrestle with purpose and what their meaning is and how they fit into a system, but they don't seem to come to a knowledge of their creator because their creator is completely absent from the story. There is no God present in the story, and there's no reason to think there is a God in Dune besides the arguments that we could give here to prove there's a God. So is Dune compelling then, besides the great detail the author put into it, besides the interest, people might, seeing different kinds of giant worms trying to crunch you, what captures your attention about Dune if the characters ultimately don't connect up to the highest good? They might overcome interpersonal and political struggles, but they don't connect up to knowing what is eternal. And that's not even a problem in Dune. Like Dune doesn't even bring it up. In that way, it seems like a very dismal fantasy. The characters don't have any great and lasting hope that's beyond their world. So how do we evaluate a imaginary or a fantasy or sci-fi world? We could apply this same thing to either Marvel or Tolkien, any of those worlds, that the details of them suck people in. And again, that's great. People have fun with that. But for learning for ourselves and connecting with the characters, what is it in these characters that will actually motivate me and keep me going forward? Can I connect with them in the sense that they too want to know the highest good and learn in the way that they've come to understand that and grow through that? So Dune and religion. My students asked, can you find God in Dune? Doesn't Dune also have a Messiah? I have another video about that, but really someone who leads a people and is willing to sacrifice themselves for a people is not the same as the idea of a Messiah. The Messiah means the anointed one of God. And if there is no God, there is no anointed one. There might be lots of leaders. There might be a leader who comes along and saves his people for a time, and then it crumbles, and you need a new leader to come along and save the people for a time. But there's no actual final solution to mankind's moral failing. And here's another story with great detail, but the question I put back to my students is, does it offer you any insight about your highest good and redemption? What's the redemption found for any of the characters in the story? So thanks for joining me talking about pop culture and philosophy. See you next time.